The Brandon Aiyuk contract saga continues to drift on as we get closer and closer to the start of the season. I will say that I expected a resolution by this time on the calendar, yet here we are. At time of recording this on August 18th, he is still a 49er, and he still does not have a new contract. This has been one of the more bizarre situations I can think of in recent memory, where you have an all-pro player at a critical position who is still very young, who, oh by the way, plays on one of the best teams in the NFL. I wouldn't say it's flying under the radar. I'm just surprised by how all over the place the reporting has been. It feels like this thing has gone in so many different directions. So for the sake of this episode, I want to simplify some things, as, I think given where we are at, it is now limited on outcomes here. I mean, the season's essentially, 3 weeks away. Let's start with some of what we have heard at various points in the last couple of months. We've heard that the 49ers offered Brandon Aiyuk something in the range of 26.5 in terms of average annual value. We've heard that he requested and the Niners granted permission for him to seek a trade. We've heard there were discussions with some, interested trade partners, Patriots, Steelers, Browns. We've heard Aiyuk said no on those trades. And then at various points, basically since the league year started, we've also heard some combination of Brandon Aiyuk and the 49ers are intent on getting a deal worked out. And look, I'm not blaming the people who have been reporting on this. They're simply doing their jobs. I believe that they vetted the information available at the time with legitimate sources and reported accordingly. One aspect I believe is in play here, and that I have not heard much about with regard to Aiyuk, is how the Brock Purdy extension may be factoring into the calculus here. The main talking points I've heard this offseason is, Aiyuk isn't worth that much, which, I disagree with, to be clear. Or, hey, you can't pay both guys. If you pay Aiyuk, then you're basically saying you're choosing him over Debo. And I do not think it is that binary, and I bet you that John Lynch is not looking at it that way either. Look, the 49ers are loaded on both sides of the ball, and they have a lot of guys who make a lot of money. Those are facts. And while this notion of you can't pay everybody, is true to an extent, let's relax on the hot takes. The reason I'm off-put by hot takes is they are very rarely taking into account all of the information or the possible outcomes. The reason I bring up the Purdy extension as potentially impacting how negotiations are going with Aiyuk this offseason is I don't think the 49ers can definitively say what Purdy's extension is going to look like. Now, just to be clear, Brock Purdy is going to get a massive extension next offseason. That is not up for debate. But when it comes to quarterbacks and just how outsized their numbers are compared to other positions, it has a big impact on the overall cap. Outside of winning a Super Bowl, Brock Purdy has had about, as much success as you can in your first 2 seasons in the league. To get dropped into the starting role midway through the 2022 season and then take the team to the NFC Championship game, which who knows how that turns out if he doesn't suffer the injury on that blindside hit, and then to, come back to rehab, be back in top form in 2023, and then take the team all the way to the Super Bowl, overtime in the Super Bowl, I should add, against the best quarterback in the game. Literally the only way Brock Purdy can eclipse the team success of the past 2 seasons would be to win the Super Bowl. I can tell you with 1,000% certainty, not winning the Super Bowl will have zero impact on Brock Purdy's extension. I mean, just look at the guys who signed deals this offseason. Tua has played in 1 playoff game, got smoked against the Chiefs. Trevor Lawrence has one playoff win and then was coming off of a down year in 23 in which they missed the playoffs, and he gets $275 million over 5 years, 200 guaranteed. Brock Purdy has a huge payday coming. What we do not know, and what John Lynch and the front office needs to evaluate, is the number of years that will be on the extension and what the dollars are going to be, especially the guaranteed money. Let's just assume it will be a 5-year extension. You're probably looking at, in terms of total value, 285, 290 on the low end, up to 320, 330 on the top end, which then, depending on how that looks, impacts the guaranteed money. So back to Brandon Aiyuk. Whether it is the 26.5 per year we've heard the 49ers were willing to offer, or whatever number Aiyuk and his team is seeking, you would be most likely looking at the significant cap charges starting to hit in 2025 or 2026 for Aiyuk. Without getting into the weeds, the longer the 49ers push out his cap charge, the more upside down they get on the dead cap number. While that is a situation all teams try to avoid, it gets especially challenging when you have a team like San Francisco, where you essentially have multiple big-name, important players coming due each offseason. It's what cratered the Rams after that Super Bowl win a few years ago. And what I am piecing together, and I cannot remember who the reporter was, so my apologies, but we heard something along the lines of the money in the 4th year of the contract was creating a holdup. So it stands to reason the Aiyuk extension is going to be 4 years, which would most likely result in the big cap charges hitting in 25, 26, 27. Remember, the Niners picked up Aiyuk's 5th-year option prior to the 2023 season. So Brandon Aiyuk, if he does in fact sign an extension, would get paid in real money, deposited to his accounts, a ton of dollars on the front end. His cap charge for 2024 would not be outrageous, but the question is, what does it look like when those dollars start to count against the cap in a significant way? And in the 49ers situation, when you have, and I'm sure I'm probably forgetting at least someone here, but you've got Purdy due next year, Fred Warner is going to be coming up again, Mufanga comes back this season, they'll have to see what he looks like, Trent Williams is still looking for a new deal, George Kittle, Debo, it's a lot to account for. So my take on this is I completely understand Brandon Aiyuk's side. When you look around the league and see what some of these receivers have signed for this offseason, he is objectively better than a lot of those players. If he believes he is a $28, $29, $30 million per year player, I don't think that's out of line. And if he happened to play for another team, one that is not as loaded with veteran talent as the 49ers, I think there's a much better chance that deal is already done by now, and this isn't even a conversation. But in the real world, Brandon Aiyuk does play for the 49ers, and they have a lot of good players who are well compensated, and a quarterback who is about to cash in on a big extension himself. At this point, I just think the chances of Aiyuk being traded before the season starts gets smaller and smaller by the day. When you consider what makes him such an effective player, he is one of the, if not the best, route runners in the entire league. He is a tactician. The precision on his routes is insane. And part of being able to run such crisp routes to create separation and windows for your quarterback to fit those passes into is a strong connection with said quarterback. And that takes time. It's no coincidence that Aiyuk had a better 2023 than he did a 2022. Even though 22 was a strong year, he had more time to work with Brock Purdy and then logs a career best in 2023. And then with regard to potential trade partners, that group continues to grow smaller as well, both in terms of the overall number of teams that might be interested and what a potential trade partner would be willing to give up. We are a few weeks out from the start of the regular season. Every day that passes is one less day for Aiyuk to work with their quarterback and learn the offense. So while I'm not saying it would be impossible to see a trade go through, it just becomes less and less likely. And look, if I'm wrong, then I'll fire up another episode so you can all hear me eat my words. I just don't see a big pool of teams willing to trade for him at this point. Brandon Aiyuk does not have a no-trade clause the way Dak Prescott does, but he does have some leverage in what a potential trade would look like. We've already seen it. If there's a situation he prefers not to become a part of, he or his representation can simply let that other team know that he has no intention of signing an extension with them, even if the financial aspect is what he's looking for. And in turn, that team would then not be willing to trade the assets the 49ers are asking for. I believe the most likely outcome here is Brandon Aiyuk continues playing for the 49ers. I don't think he wants to leave this team, and I don't think the Niners want to lose him. So I'm looking for a potential shorter-term contract agreed to by club and player that is either majority or fully guaranteed. Maybe something along the lines of 3 years for 85 to 90 million with 70, 75-ish guaranteed. That would basically guarantee Aiyuk is paid top dollar for a minimum of 2 seasons, with enough left on the third year to force the 49ers to come back to the negotiating table. And keep in mind, Brandon Aiyuk is only 26. He doesn't turn 27 until basically the start of the new league year in 2025. So in that scenario, even if it didn't work out long term, he gets his money and then hits the open market at age 28 or 29. I also wouldn't rule out something similar to what we saw with DeAndre Hopkins and the Cardinals a few years ago. Now, the difference is Aiyuk would be extending his deal with the team that drafted him, and therefore the 49ers would not have to do any calculations on what they had to give up to acquire him in the first place. But I think that would have to be, at minimum, 2 years with, call it 60 to 65 fully guaranteed to make it enticing for Aiyuk's side. But regardless of how this plays out numbers-wise, I am leaning way more toward Brandon Aiyuk being a 49er in 2024. I just feel that is the likely scenario. Now that said, I would be very surprised if Aiyuk remained a 49er without some sort of contract adjustment. I cannot see a reality in which he's out there for the Monday night opener against the Jets without something getting done. Generally speaking, when a player of Brandon Aiyuk's caliber has his fifth-year option exercised, the player and team agree to an extension before that fifth season starts. Jalen Waddle, who was drafted the year after Brandon Aiyuk and has played 3 seasons to Aiyuk's 4, already has his new deal in place, as does Amon-Ra St. Brown, as does Nico Collins, Devontae Smith, and those guys were all drafted in 2021. And as for the big names in 2020, Justin Jefferson is signed, largest contract ever for a wide receiver. Now CeeDee Lamb is still waiting for his deal, as is T. Higgins. But here's the thing about Higgins. He was a second-round pick in 2020, so he was not eligible for the fifth-year option. And then he was franchise tagged. And because he is playing on the tag, his 2024 compensation comes in at $21.8 million. Aiyuk is scheduled for $14.1. CeeDee Lamb's fifth year is going to pay him $18 million. So whether it's Aiyuk or CeeDee Lamb or T. Higgins, any of those guys, I completely understand them wanting their money, especially when they see their peers cash in. And let's be real, these guys are competitors. And in a sport where serious injuries are common, there is an added urgency to earn as much as you possibly can, get as much guaranteed money as you can, inside of a very narrow time frame. So when you see guys who you think you are better than earning millions of dollars more than you, of course that's not going to sit well. Here's a quick list of the 2024 compensation for the guys drafted in 2020 and 2021. Now, this is just 2024 by itself. This is not counting the rest of the guaranteed money these guys got on their new deals. St. Brown, $17.9 million. Jerry Jeudy, $19 million. Nico Collins, $19.2. Jalen Waddle, $20 million. Devontae Smith, $21.4. Michael Pittman, $28. Justin Jefferson, $38. I'll let you be the judge as to where you think Aiyuk comes in on that list, but hopefully that sheds a little bit of light on why playing on the fifth-year number is a no-go for him at this point. We'll see how the situation plays out as we get closer to week 1. I'm going to guess a deal gets done. This is the final year of Purdy making essentially no money. The 49ers nearly won the whole thing last year. And you have to make this run with all of your best players. You cannot expect to duplicate last year's success without your all-pro wideout. Thanks for listening.